In the spring of 1960, 300 million people watched Princess Margaret marry the most charming man in Britain. The first royal wedding ever broadcast on television. 22 days later, the wife of the groom's best friend gave birth to a baby girl. And 44 years after that, a DNA test reportedly confirmed what a handful of insiders had whispered for decades. The baby was the groom's. Antony Armstrong-Jones entered the royal family looking like a fairy tale. He would leave it as the man who almost tore that family apart. And the wedding day secret was only the beginning. Anthony Charles Robert Armstrong-Jones was born in London on March 7, 1930, into a world of money, glamour, and almost total emotional neglect. His father, Ronald, was a successful barrister. His mother, Anne Messel, was one of the most celebrated society beauties of her generation, dazzling, ambitious, and ice-cold where her son was concerned. When Tony was 5, his parents divorced, and Anne traded up spectacularly, marrying the Earl of Ross and becoming a countess with a castle in Ireland. She then produced 2 new sons with actual titles. And by most accounts, the untitled boy from the first marriage slid rapidly down her list of priorities. One story told and retold in society circles has her introducing him at a party as "my untitled son." Whether or not that exact line was ever spoken, the message reached him loud and clear. Tony Armstrong-Jones grew up as the leftover child, and he would spend the rest of his life making absolutely everyone fall in love with him to compensate. Then at 16 came the blow that shaped everything. While at Eton, Tony contracted polio. He spent 6 months in a Liverpool hospital, fighting for the use of his legs, and according to multiple accounts, his mother barely visited. His sister came faithfully. The Countess, reportedly, almost never. He emerged with a permanently weakened left leg, a limp he learned to disguise, and a lesson burned into him. Charm was survival. If people adored you, they couldn't abandon you. It was the ice-cold Countess who forged the seducer, and the seducer was about to be handed a weapon. That weapon was a camera. After Cambridge, where, polio leg and all, he coaxed the winning crew in the 1950 boat race through sheer bloody-minded will. Tony failed his architecture exams and drifted into photography, apprenticing under the society photographer Baron. It turned out he was brilliant at it. His portraits were fresh, intimate, alive. He got actors and duchesses to drop their masks because he flirted with every single person who sat in front of his lens. And the flirting rarely stopped at the studio door. His appetite became legendary in London's theatre world. Men, women, married, single. One friend reportedly summed him up in 6 words. If it moves, he'll have it. He kept a secret white-walled room in Rotherhithe, on the south bank of the Thames, with no telephone and no staff, a hideaway for work and for everything else. By his late 20s, Tony Armstrong-Jones was photographing the royal family itself. And in 1958, at a quiet dinner party, he was introduced to the loneliest woman in England. Princess Margaret was the Queen's younger sister, and by 1958, She was a national tragedy in slow motion. 3 years earlier, she had been forced to renounce the love of her life. The divorced war hero group captain Peter Townsend, because the Church of England and the government would not stomach a royal marrying a divorced man. An irony so enormous it deserves a moment of silence, given where this story is heading. Margaret was glamorous, wounded, sharp-tongued, and bored. Tony was everything the palace was not: fast, funny, modern, classless. Their courtship was conducted in total secrecy. Margaret slipping across the river in headscarves to the little room in Rotherhithe, where a princess could wash dishes and pretend to be nobody. Then, in 1959, a letter arrived that detonated everything. Townsend wrote to tell Margaret he was marrying a young Belgian woman. According to several accounts, Margaret accepted Tony's proposal almost immediately afterward. Within about a day. Whether it was love, revenge, or both, we'll likely never know. What is certain is that Britain was about to get the shock of the decade. The engagement was announced on February 26, 1960, and Fleet Street nearly combusted. A photographer, a man with a studio in Pimlico and paint on his trousers. Reportedly, no commoner had married a king's daughter in more than 400 years. But behind the palace gates, the real drama was the vetting. Because Tony's world did not survive close inspection well. His choice of best man was his dearest friend Jeremy Fry, a wealthy engineer and bon vivant. Weeks before the ceremony, Fry abruptly stood down, officially due to a bout of jaundice. The truth, which emerged later, was that palace vetting had discovered a 1952 conviction for a minor homosexual offence. Fry had been fined all of £2, and in 1960 that was disqualifying. So the palace did what palaces do best. It quietly produced a more respectable best man nobody had heard of. The courtiers congratulated themselves on catching the problem. They had no idea that the real scandal wasn't standing beside the groom. It was the groom. The wedding on May 6, 1960 at Westminster Abbey was a global sensation. The first royal wedding ever televised, watched by a reported 300 million people. The couple then departed on a 6-week Caribbean honeymoon aboard the royal yacht Britannia, at a reported cost of around £26,000. Several ordinary houses worth of money for 6 weeks of sailing. The nation swooned, and Antony Armstrong-Jones walked out of that abbey, carrying a secret that would take 44 years to surface. For a while, the fairy tale actually held. In October 1961, the Queen created him Earl of Snowdon. Conveniently, 1 month before Margaret gave birth to their son David, ensuring no grandchild of a king would be born a commoner. A daughter, Sarah, followed in May 1964. The couple moved into apartment 1A at Kensington Palace, renovated at a reported cost of £85,000 in public money, and became the most glamorous double act in Britain. The Snowdons were the bridge between the Crown and the swinging 60s. Dining with the Beatles, partying with Peter Sellers and Rudolf Nureyev, smoking and dancing while the rest of the royal family attended church fetes. And Tony refused to become a decorative husband. He took a job with the Sunday Times as a photographer, scandalizing courtiers who considered a working royal husband vulgar. And his work was genuinely superb. He co-designed the futuristic Snowdon Aviary at London Zoo in 1965. In 1969, he masterminded the entire look of Prince Charles's investiture at Caernarfon Castle, staging it under a sleek perspex canopy for a television audience reported at 500 million. The man was, quite literally, the image maker of the modern monarchy, which makes what he did to that image all the more devastating, because behind the doors of apartment 1A, the marriage was rotting at jaw-dropping speed. Tony and Margaret were two performers locked in one spotlight, and neither would dim. The fights became legendary among their staff, vicious, theatrical, sometimes public. And Tony's weapon of choice was cruelty by memo. He took to leaving notes for his wife where she would find them, in her glove box, in her books, on her desk. One, according to multiple accounts, was a list titled 24 Reasons Why I Hate You. Another reportedly compared her to items he found distasteful. This was psychological warfare conducted on palace stationery. Margaret drank more. Tony disappeared for weeks on, assignments that were not entirely photographic. His companions reportedly included the aristocrat Lady Jacqueline Rufus Isaacs, and, later, a young researcher named Lucy Lindsay Hogg, a name worth remembering for where this story goes. Margaret eventually answered in kind. In 1973, at a house party in Scotland, she met Roddy Llewellyn, a landscape gardener 17 years her junior, because subtlety was never a specialty of this household. The affair gave the wounded princess something to live for. It also handed her husband the loaded gun he'd been waiting for. In February 1976, the News of the World published a photograph of Margaret and Roddy together on the Caribbean island of Moustique. The picture was innocent enough. Two people at a table in swimwear, but the story exploded like a bomb. And Tony, reportedly, seized his moment with the timing of a master tactician. Though his own infidelities were an open secret in their circle, he played the wronged husband flawlessly, and much of the press bought it. The separation was announced on March 19, 1976. On July 11, 1978, the divorce was finalized. Reportedly the first divorce at the very heart of the British monarchy since Henry VIII in 1540. It is difficult to overstate what that meant. This was the institution that had forced Margaret to give up Townsend, precisely because divorce was unthinkable, now devouring one of its own. Members of Parliament questioned Margaret's taxpayer-funded income. Clergymen thundered. Republicans celebrated. The monarchy's carefully constructed image of untouchable domestic virtue, an image Tony himself had helped photograph into existence, cracked in public for the first time in the modern age. The fault line he opened never fully closed. The royal divorces that shook the 1990s all walked through the door the Snowdons broke down. the family survived. But it survived changed, and it had come closer to a full-blown constitutional crisis of reputation than at any time since the abdication. And Tony landed on his feet with almost supernatural grace. 5 months after the divorce, in December 1978, he married Lucy Lindsay Hogg, who was already pregnant. Their daughter Frances arrived the following July. More remarkably, the royal family kept him. The Queen reportedly retained a genuine soft spot for her former brother-in-law, and he continued taking official royal photographs for decades. The rare man in history to be fired from a royal marriage and keep the job. He also revealed in these same years the most genuinely admirable side of his entire life. The polio survivor became a relentless campaigner for disabled people, founding an award scheme in 1981 that funded disabled students, championing wheelchair design and hauling the issue in front of a country that preferred not to look. It is one of the strangest contradictions in this whole story. The man capable of leaving hate lists for his wife spent decades fighting, tirelessly and sincerely, for strangers who couldn't walk. But his private life never stopped generating casualties. For nearly 20 years, reportedly, Snowdon carried on an affair with a journalist named Anne Hills. On New Year's Eve 1996, she was found dead on the roof terrace of her London home. She had taken her own life. Then, in 1998, came a scandal that stunned even his friends. At 67, Snowdon fathered a son, Jasper, with Melanie Cable Alexander, an editor at Country Life, while still married to Lucy. He reportedly denied it at first. The truth came out anyway. Lucy, who had endured 20 years of this, finally walked, and the second marriage was over by 2000. Snowdon was approaching 70, twice divorced, with children by 3 women. And, as the world would soon learn, that count was still 1 short. Margaret went first. Ravaged by strokes, partially paralyzed, and confined to a wheelchair after badly scalding her feet in 1999, the princess died on February 9th, 2002, at 71. At her funeral sat her ex-husband, frail, in a wheelchair himself now as post-polio syndrome reclaimed his legs, mourning the woman he had once destroyed by memo. Snowdon lived on another 15 years, photographing almost to the end, and died peacefully at his London home on January 13, 2017, at the age of 86. The obituaries called him the greatest royal photographer of his century, a brilliant designer, a champion of the disabled. And then, in careful language, they gestured at the whispers. Because one story had outlived him, the one that began 22 days after his wedding. To close that loop, the story has to return to a honey-coloured manor house outside Bath in the late 1950s, Widcombe Manor, home of Jeremy and Camilla Fry. Jeremy was Tony's closest friend. The Fry's home was his refuge, and by several accounts, his entanglement with the household went far beyond friendship. Some versions suggest it involved more than one member of the marriage. What is no longer in doubt is this. During the very months Tony was secretly courting Princess Margaret in his Rotherhithe hideaway, He was also sleeping with Camilla Fry. By the time the engagement was announced in February 1960, Camilla was pregnant, which casts the best man fiasco in a truly chilling new light. The palace machinery dug into Jeremy Fry's past and removed him from the abbey over a £2 fine, while the groom stood at the altar with his pregnant mistress's family watching from the pews. The palace had vetted the best man. Nobody thought to vet the groom. Polly Fry was born on May 28, 1960, 22 days after the wedding of the century, and was raised as Jeremy's daughter while the rumors circled quietly for 4 decades. Then, in 2004, Polly, by now 44 years old, pursued the truth, and a DNA test reportedly confirmed that her biological father was the Earl of Snowdon. He never publicly discussed it. He didn't need to. The result said everything. While 300 million people watched Antony Armstrong-Jones promise himself to a princess, the proof that he could never truly belong to anyone was already on its way into the world, and it had been sitting in plain sight in the front pews of Westminster Abbey the entire time. Thanks for watching channel. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page, Factinate, for more incredible facts about everything.